Alright guys, so this is going to be a quick one on force feedback, right? And more specifically, what you should probably feel through the steering wheel versus other cues that you get from the sim, right? Because I see it on forums where there's custom force feedback files, there's the ideal force feedback, and all of that stuff, right? But I tend to look at things a lot simpler because a car is a car, right? The steering wheel will behave in a certain way in most situations across all cars. Yes, the sims will feel a little bit different, but what I would say to you is that by and large, how it feels should be very similar. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the Ginetta GT4 in ACC, then I'm going to jump into AMS2. We're going to go to Silverstone because that's got a lot of high-speed corners where I could probably demonstrate the understeer effects on what we get through the wheel versus what we get from elsewhere, such as sound and visual cues. And we'll talk about that in a second. But first, let me just show you my Fanatec settings here, right? So this is my Fanatec settings for ACC. It's pretty much the same in AMS2. I'll share that as well when we get there. But so what I've done, the overall force feedback strength is set to 65% in my Fanalab. Then I've got the damper just set to 5%. I did used to run with this completely off, but I thought a little bit of damping just makes it feel a little bit more realistic and doesn't take away any detail really. So I went ahead with that. Friction and inertia I turned off. So what the friction does is it's basically a static setting by how difficult or how much friction the wheel will apply on top of the force feedback from the game. So this is kind of an artificial friction, maybe to simulate, big tires or something like that. But, I personally leave that off. The inertia thing then is basically, if you're making a correction, how much the wheel will want to continue in the direction you've turned it. So think of people doing like drift type games and stuff like that. The interpolation then, the next one I have on 1. Now ACC updates its force feedback at 400 hertz on PC at least. I'm not too sure about console, but I think it's gone to 400. I think, but anyway, on PC it's 400 hertz, and that's a pretty high refresh rate. But still, I want Fanalab to interfere and smoothen it out even further. So basically, you can imagine force feedback in steps as the driver gets the signal. What the interpolation does is it fills in the gaps between those steps with its own steps, so it smoothens the signal. If you go too high on that setting, everything will be super smooth and you won't actually get the feedback of snap corrections and little moments as they happen. So for me, I think 1 is good. The force effect intensity is self-explanatory. That's the overall effect of the forces through the game and how intense they should be. You lower that number, things get smoother, but you also introduce some latency into the signal, so be careful with that one. The spring effect strength and the game force spring strength, I don't believe have any bearings at all. I just leave them at 100. And then the damper effect. So some games will run this slider off their in-game damper. Now, moving back to ACC, and let's go into my particular setup on the controls. So I have the gain. This is the overall output of ACC set to 50. Fanalab was 65. So overall, I've got a DD2 wheelbase. So the maximum torque available is probably around, I don't know, what, 13. No, about available. What's a 25 newton meter standard? So probably about 14 newton meters peak available, which is fine for me. Minimum force and damper set to 0. That damper, I'm just going to let the Fanalab wheelbase control the damping. Dynamic damping set to 100, right? So that's basically where it was at default, I believe. And what dynamic damping does is that as the speed increases, so too does the level of damping. And think about this for a second, that as you increase speed on a straight or into a bend, the car, the downforce or whatever, the tires are going to get pushed into the ground a bit more. Everything kind of gets damped in feeling. So yeah, feel free to run that at around 100 or so. It doesn't really take away too much detail from anywhere else. So that's really it. The other interesting thing, right, is the audio. Now let's jump into audio and let's see how I have this set up. Now you'll notice that I have my tires set to 100%, where everything else is pretty much set to 70%. And the exterior engine, that's just for my own when I'm looking outside the car. Ignore that. But why do I want the tyres louder and everything else? Well, it comes down to the cues I was talking about, right? So we get three main cues in sim racing, right? The first and the most obvious is through the steering wheel, so what the wheel is doing. The second one we get is the visual. So as we're turning, we're looking at the screen and we're seeing the horizon, how quick or how slow it might move relative to our steering input, which is relative to how much steering we expect in a given situation. So if the horizon starts to move a little bit quicker, we can think, okay, maybe we're getting a bit of oversteer. Then we listen for the tyre. Is the tyre squealing at the same time? If yes, and you feel it through the steering wheel, you make that quick snap correction. So they are the visual cues that we look for. So let's let's go out and actually see what this is like in terms of understeer, oversteer, visual cues and stuff like that, and let's talk about it. And we're going to be looking as well for essentially tyre scrub. Well, at the minute when I'm just turning like this, I can feel the steering wheel nice and weighted, and into this corner, if I just kind of completely oversteer the steering wheel angle, you'll notice that the horizon is actually not moving as quick as it would versus if I do this. So you can see at this angle the horizon's moving at a certain speed, where if I do this, the horizon doesn't move, and more importantly, I can feel the steering wheel go light. I get a little vibration through the steering wheel to tell me the front tyre is scrubbing, and more importantly, I can hear the tyre squeal. So let's listen to the tyre squeal when I'm purposely understeering versus when I'm not. So I'm getting three different cues there. I'm hearing the tyre scrub, the steering wheel is going lighter relative to, you know, when we're fully gripped up, and I'm also then noticing that the horizon isn't turning or isn't moving within my peripherals as quick as it should, based on the amount of steering I'm putting in, because obviously I'm overdriving the front end of the car. There's just not enough grip there. So you can hear again that those tyre squeals or those tyre scrubbing noises, it's important to have your tyres a little louder than everything else, because like I say, you get three main cues: steering wheel, visual and audio, and we have to kind of work with that. So let's do a bit of a lap and just kind of listen. And pay attention, I guess, to the squeal versus the actual rotation or degrees of rotation of the horizon. And just there, I don't know if you noticed, it was very minute to pick up, but the horizon was moving faster in my windscreen, if you like, relative to the amount of steering I was putting into it. So an oversteer moment and a correction. And actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to give a perfect example of this. The horizon will move while the steering wheel is straight. This will actually drive the point home completely. And let me show you how I'm going to do this. It's going to end up in a bit of a wreck, but whatever. Steering wheel straight, and the horizon was moving, and off the track we go. Now, I'm exaggerating, of course, right? But it's an example of what I'm saying to you. Is the steering wheel is straight, and the car is essentially rotating. I've put the car out of control into an oversteer situation, and we heard the audio, the tyre squealing, letting go of grip. The steering wheel was vibrating a bit, even though it was straight. So that's kind of the game telling me that yes, you've overdriven, the car basically. And we're going to have a moment. Now, it's also worth mentioning that some sims will also kind of have this seat of the pant effect kind of put into them. You know, like there's add-ons like I think or Fuckter or whatever it's called. I think do a custom force feedback file for Automobilista 2. We have the iRacing. There's I think it's called IRFFB, which essentially is an add-on, right? Now, they're good, and if you like them, great. But personally, my opinion on those is that they all are interfering with other stuff that just becomes difficult to, or potentially difficult to interpret, right? So when I'm driving here, and ACC models the front axle only, there's no real seat of the pant effect or anything like that, there's no other stuff going on. So I can reliably bed into my head that, okay, the steering wheel and what I feel is the front of the car. The audio is obviously the tyres and what the tyres are doing and any ground impacts and all of that. And then the visual cue for how much I might be turning. Turning too much or turning too little or otherwise. And I can reliably say that that's what I'm feeling. There's no guesswork, there's no other seat of the pant kind of effects going on, or anything like that. So it becomes very much, you can see there kind of the understeer effect on the tyre. But it becomes very reliable in terms of what information it's giving me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump into AMS2, I'm going to pick the same car and track combo, and I'm just going to test that the actual the feeling I get is similar. It's not going to feel the exact same, right, because obviously the sims are running different tyre models. Physics might be slightly different, but what I'm looking to see is, do I get the same information? As in, does the steering wheel go light when it should? Does the tyre audio give me the squeals and stuff that I would expect? And how does the horizon act in terms of, like, does the car turn more or less at a certain degree of steering input? So I'll pause this here and we'll jump into AMS2. Alright guys, so here we are in Automobilista 2, and let's jump into the same settings that we looked at in ACC. Let's start with the sound, right? So the sound, you can notice my tyre volume is higher than my engine volume and my other kind of effects, if you like. Now, it's not as high, and there's not much of a difference between ACC, where there was like 30 points on the scale, where there's about maybe 15 or 17, and the reason being is because AMS2 tyre squeal effects tend to be a little bit higher out of the box, so it's at a place where I can hear it pretty well. My force feedback settings, or my configuration rather, so steering sensitivity 50-50, and the brake sensitivity I have down to 0, because AMS2 has a very sensitive brake to lock up. And in terms of the feedback profile, I'm using the default with gain of 60, damping of 50 again. I believe this is the dynamic damping, so just like ACC, I'm leaving it at the halfway mark, and everything else then is just as default. Now let's have a look at the Fanatec settings. So this is my AMS2 profile. So the natural damper, I'm just going to bring that up to 5% to match ACC. The interpolation is at 1 as normal. Everything else at 100%. So exactly the same profile as ACC. The only difference is that the overall strength is down at 48%, whereas the ACC one was up at I think it was 65. And again, when it comes to force effect strength, all we're doing is we're just concerning ourselves with the overall weight of the steering, nothing more. So don't look into it too much in terms of feedback and what it's giving you. So now that we've done that, yeah, let's go and drive the Ginetta, I guess. So we're going to be looking for the oversteer or mainly understeer situation. So let's see. And again, listen for the effects of the tyre squeal and all of that sort of thing. And this is probably a bit more oversteery than the ACC version, right? So we're going to see the horizon maybe moving a bit more than the steering input would suggest. So keep an eye for that as well. And I'll purposely put the car into kind of little spins and maybe understeer situations just to explain the point. So you can see there we've got a certain degree of grip, and then if I overdo it, like the car's actually pushing on straight pretty much, and I can feel the steering go lighter when we're in those situations. And there's an example of where the horizon is starting to move quicker, and listen to the tyre squeal. You can hear the scrub, the horizon is moving quicker relative to the steering angle input, which is exactly the point that we had in ACC as well. Let's try a bit of understeer. And you can see there that with the amount of steering, the horizon is not moving. And the reason I'm making a point about this horizon thing, right, is because knock off the wiper, is that because this is an additional cue that people should use in addition to the force feedback, along with the sound and along with the visual. And a lot of people, including myself, I must be honest, right, get hung up on the whole force feedback thing, like, oh, I should feel everything through the steering wheel. It's like, yeah, but there's other shit going on as well. Even real life drivers have the seat of the pants, they have the visual, they have the audio. So as sim racers, we shouldn't just rely on the holy mecca of force feedback. What we should be asking ourselves is, does the force feedback, even though it might feel a bit different from one sim to the other, does it give us the required information to be able to drive effectively, in addition to all the other cues going on? Understeer, and we can see that again the horizon doesn't move as quick as we expect, but now with the level of grip on the car that I expect, the horizon is moving and the car is moving. Obviously we slow right down, grip up, and the horizon, the visual cue, everything moves faster in our windscreen and the car turns quicker, obviously. So this is what it's all about in terms of, you know, the title of this video. The whole point of this video is, what should we be feeling through force feedback? And what we should be feeling pretty much is just, in an ideal world, is what the front of the car should be doing, because it's most reliable. And then in addition to that, to drive effectively, we should also be willing to use other cues, such as audio and visual. And so what I'm feeling now is, I'm feeling the steering go light when we get a bit of oversteer. I'm being able to make corrections, but I'm hearing the tyres scrub, so I know how much control is being lost on the car, roughly speaking. And that in conjunction with how much the car's turning with the, let's say, the surroundings moving through the windscreen, I can kind of piece all that together in my head based on like experience and wherever else, and know how much to correct by, how much the car's out of control by, all of that sort of thing. So, you know, and bear in mind, obviously, I'm stating the obvious here, right, but different sims will run different tyre models. So, the amount of understeer that you might feel from one sim to the other might be slightly different. You might have more, you might have less. Doesn't matter, not really. The important thing is that the information that you're getting is somewhat similar from one sim to the other. As in, the steering wheel should behave a certain way in an oversteer situation. It should behave a certain way in an understeer situation. There shouldn't be any guesswork as to what the car's doing in the steering wheel. Even though it might feel a little bit more or less from one sim to the other, the actual overall message that you're getting through the wheel should be very consistent. You should also have the audio cues going on from the tyre squeal, the tyre scrub, and you should also have the visual cues ready in your head as well. And when you bring these together, that's what I will say is overall force feedback, right? So it's the overall feedback to the driver from the physical force of the wheel, the audio forces going on, the visual forces going through the car. So yeah, don't look at steering wheel force feedback in isolation thinking that that's the only feedback loop or the feedback source that you need to worry about, because believe me, there's a lot of time to be made by taking into account the other stuff, particularly the tyres. View up the tyre squeal and pay attention to what the tyre is doing. Believe me, you'll actually not worry too much about the steering wheel force feedback. But another thing I'll say, and finally leave it here, is if the game, or if you need high levels of damping and filters on your steering wheel base, that's okay, but just be aware that that's interfering with the intended signal from the game, and it may just skew the reality of the situation. So what I mean by that is, if you're one of these that, let's say, want to focus a lot on the actual steering wheel feedback, right, and let's say you get the steering wheel feeling what you think is good, you might be in a situation where the steering wheel, you're like, oh, I'm about to lose the rear, but yet the tyres are not making any noise. You're actually not about to lose the rear. So what I mean is, like, you risk programming the steering wheel to give you the wrong information. And the only thing worse than no information is the wrong information. So yeah, make it that what you will. But yeah, this has been my thoughts, guys, on force feedback, for what it's worth. Like I say, I'm not trying to convert anyone to my way of thinking or anything. I'm just kind of stating the facts about what I look for, what we should get through the steering wheel. And, you know, if you run alternative settings and you're happy, by all means continue to do it. But what I'm trying to do here is just simplify the landmines that are out there in terms of feedback, and people get caught up a bit too much on what the ideal feedback is. But yeah, I think a lot of that might be just down to running a huge amount of dampers. And people then will run dampers because they will say, oh, my steering wheel rocks violently from side to side. That's actually normal enough, right? Because how a game has to feed signals to the feedback is it says, okay, send a signal, make the steering wheel go to the left. And then immediately after, the game says, hang on, the tire's not being pushed back the other way, make the steering wheel go to the right. So you get this kind of, you know, back and forward in the steering wheel, where if you let go of the wheel, it will start to violently run back and forward. And that's okay, that's, you know, you don't drive a car with no hands on the wheel. So don't use that as your marker for effective force feedback. I mean, yes, by all means, dampen that, let's say, back and forward to some degree. Bit of damping. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that you have to increase the damping to the point where the steering wheel doesn't do that rocking, and you think that's where the feedback should be. That is not the case. That is not the case at all. The way force feedback APIs are dealt with from games into our hardware, there always will be a bit of that rocking back and forward. Once it's not excessive and once it's not stupid, a little bit of liveliness in the wheel is perfectly normal. Just one thing I wanted to add at the end. I'm going to do a little series about controls and inputs and stuff, right? So we've done the steering wheel, a bit of what the tires are going to do. Next one I'm probably going to look at is pedals, and talk about the pedal, let's say, strength, and how some people prefer a hard pedal versus a soft pedal, the pros and cons, and maybe some of the misconceptions that are out there as well. But yeah, that'll be probably in the next video. But yeah, thanks again, guys, for watching, and yeah, look forward to the next one.